What's going on, Grandma?
Look, I need you to come over here and cut Grandmama grass. Baby. Lord, I can't never get this thing to work right. See?
Disturbing story out of Georgia. Officials say an inmate used a gun to kill a kitchen worker at a prison before fatally shooting himself. This happened around 4:30 yesterday morning at the Smith State Prison in Glenville, Georgia. That's about an hour from Savannah.
But what that news report didn't tell you is that prison officials had known about the gun used in this killing for over a year. Several inmates had warned them multiple times, and they did absolutely nothing. Orion Shavea Grace, a 24-year-old mother of two, was found shot dead in the kitchen of Smith State Prison on June 16, 2024. Her killer was an inmate serving 20 years for manslaughter, a man who had been receiving preferential treatment from prison staff that allowed him access to areas where he had no business being. But before we get to how a loaded firearm sat hidden inside a maximum security prison while authorities looked the other way, let me take you back to September 21st, 1999, where Orion's story began in Statesboro, Georgia. Orion Shavea Grace grew up in a large, close-knit family and graduated from Statesboro High School in 2018. She immediately began building a life centered around providing for the people she loved. Her mother, DeShonda Hagens, described her daughter as someone who went above and beyond for others. She was a wonderful mother to her kids. She was a great sister, and she was a great daughter to me, Hagens would later say through tears. Orion had two young children, a 1-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter, who were her entire world.
Cause you was like the sun that came out right after the rain. And we always gonna be good cause mommy doing her thing. I'll never leave your side and I put that on everything.
She worked grueling shifts, sometimes 11 to 14 days straight, to make sure they had everything they needed. She was saving money to attend nursing school, dreaming of a better future for her family. Before joining Aramark, the food service contractor at Smith State Prison, Orion had actually worked as a corrections officer for the state of Georgia. She understood the prison environment and knew the dangers. But when she started her new job in the kitchen around January of 2024, she approached it with the same kindness and compassion that defined her character. Her mother had warned her about being too trusting. You can't let everybody get close to you, because when they see that you have a kind heart and you will help anybody, they'll take advantage of it, Hagens had cautioned. But Orion believed in seeing the good in people. That compassion, that willingness to treat even inmates with dignity and respect, was both her greatest strength and, tragically, what would be exploited in the most horrific way imaginable. Now let's talk about the man who would take her life. Jadricus Cartez Hart was born in 1990 in Villa Rica, Georgia. His criminal history began early, with arrests for forgery, failure to appear in court, and probation violations dating back to 2007. But it was on May 27, 2013, during a Memorial Day gathering in Villa Rica, that Hart's life took a violent turn. During an argument at a party, Hart retrieved a handgun and shot Henry Jr. Mathis multiple times. Mathis was transported to Tanner Medical Center, where he died from his injuries. Hart fled the scene with an accomplice, but was eventually arrested and charged with murder. In March 2015, Hart pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and aggravated battery. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison with a maximum release date of June 2043. He began serving his sentence at Smith State Prison in Glenville, a facility that houses approximately 1,500 of Georgia's most violent offenders. And this is where the story gets deeply disturbing. Because while Hart was supposed to be a closely monitored inmate serving time for taking someone's life, he was reportedly receiving preferential treatment from prison staff. He was allowed to violate rules and had access to areas where he shouldn't have been allowed, including the kitchen where Orion worked. According to reports confirmed by the Georgia Department of Corrections, Hart and Orion had developed a personal relationship during the brief time she worked at the prison. The relationship apparently developed sometime after she started her job in January of 2024. They communicated through contraband cell phones that were rampant throughout the facility. And while we'll never know the full extent or nature of their connection, what we do know is that this relationship would end in unimaginable tragedy. But here's what makes this entire situation so much worse. The gun that Hart used to kill Orion didn't just magically appear on June 16th. The weapon had been smuggled into Smith State Prison sometime between June 30th and July 10th of 2023, nearly a full year before Orion was murdered. The weapon was thrown over the prison fence in a package that also contained tobacco, clothing, and suspected drugs. This wasn't some random act, as it was coordinated by a life sentence inmate as part of a larger escape plan, connected to what investigators would later describe as a large-scale criminal network operating within the Georgia Department of Corrections. When the inmates originally in possession of the gun were segregated for other contraband violations, primarily cell phones, the weapon was moved to the prison kitchen and eventually entrusted to Hart. By January 1, 2024, photos of the gun were circulating among inmates via illicit cell phones. Even more damning, GDC investigators definitively knew about the gun's presence by June 13, 2024. That was 3 days before Orion was killed. They had 72 hours to secure that weapon, to protect the people working in that facility, to prevent what was about to happen. Instead, they let Orion walk into work on June 16th, completely unaware that she was in mortal danger. The morning of June 16, 2024 started like any other shift for Orion. She arrived at Smith State Prison around 4:30 in the morning to begin preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Hart, who was not authorized to be in that area, was allowed access anyway. According to details that would later emerge through contraband cell phones, Hart asked other staff members to leave the kitchen area, and then he shot Orion. A suicide note was found at the scene, though authorities have never disclosed its contents. Hart then turned the gun on himself. Both were pronounced dead at the scene.
A disturbing story out of Georgia. Officials say an inmate used a gun to kill a kitchen worker at a prison before fatally shooting himself. This happened around 4:30 yesterday morning at the Smith State Prison in Glenville, Georgia. That's about an hour from Savannah. The Georgia Department of Corrections issued a statement saying Jadrakus Hart fatally shot 24-year-old Ariane Grace, a food service worker in the prison's kitchen. Officials say Grace had worked at the prison since January. The agency is investigating but did not say how the inmate got access to a gun. This is the second murder of a staff member at Smith State Prison.
But here's something that should absolutely horrify you about how Orion's family learned about her death. They didn't get a call from the prison or Orion's employer, Aramark. Instead, inmates using contraband cell phones contacted Orion's family through social media. They actually found Orion's Facebook page, identified her relatives, and sent them messages about what had happened, before prison officials could even assess the situation. DeShonda Hagens received a screenshot from inmates that described the horrific scene in detail. The message included what were reported to be Orion's last words, "But I have children." Imagine being a mother and learning that your daughter was murdered not from official channels, not from law enforcement, but from criminals using illegal cell phones they weren't supposed to have. Hagens described her reaction. "I just started screaming and panicking. I didn't wait for nobody else to call because I just wanted to go and put eyes on my child, so I went to the prison." She spent 7 hours at Smith State Prison that day waiting for updates from the Georgia Department of Corrections Director of Professional Standards. The Georgia Department of Corrections quickly issued a statement confirming that Hart and Orion had a personal relationship, and you could almost feel them trying to shift the narrative, as if the existence of a relationship somehow explained away or justified the massive security failures that led to this tragedy. But Orion's mother wasn't having it. When asked about the emphasis on this relationship, Hagens fired back. "What does that have to do with having a gun to kill my child?" She made it crystal clear where the focus should be. Why didn't they protect her? Why? They need to put things in place and make sure the prisons are being ran correctly so that no other mother has to go through this. And Higgins raised another critical point that the Georgia Department of Corrections wanted to gloss over. The gun was in that prison for over a year before Orion even started working there. She began her job in January of 2024. The weapon was smuggled mid-2023. So any suggestion that Orion had somehow been involved in bringing that gun into the facility was pure deflection. They're saying all of these things about my daughter. Do they even know? Nobody knows the real story because she's not here to tell it, Higgins said, fighting back against attempts to blame her daughter for systemic failures.
No one deserves to, and especially at work where she was working hard to take care of her kids.
But first, the mother of a woman by an inmate at a Georgia prison is speaking only with Fox 5. And that is where we start tonight on News Edge at 11. I'm Christine Spiro.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Tom Haynes. 24-year-old Arian Grace at Smith State Prison in Southeast Georgia over the weekend.
Now her family is sharing their heartbreak and their anger with News Edge reporter Rob DiRienzo here live in studio.
That's right, guys. Good evening. Well, this family is hurt. They're shocked, but they're also furious with the Georgia Department of Corrections. The mom of 24-year-old Arian Grace says she was just trying to earn a living, and the prison failed to keep her safe.
I'm really in disbelief of the fact that it was even a firearm in the facility.
24-year-old Arian Grace's family started getting messages on Facebook early Sunday morning that something was terribly wrong at her job at Smith State Prison.
Inmates were going through social media, looking on her social media to find people related to her.
And that's how DeShonda Higgins found out about her daughter's murder. The prison says inmate Jadrakis Hart Grace than himself. She was working for the food company Aramark in the kitchen there. Prison officials said Monday they believe Grace and Hart had a personal relationship, but her mom sees that as a deflection.
What does that have to do with an inmate having a gun to kill my child?
And Higgins wants the Department of Corrections to focus on that, how the got into a maximum security prison where some of the most violent state convicts stay. She says investigators have ripped apart her daughter's apartment while executing a search warrant, leaving behind this mess.
And bust the bags open all over my grandchildren's stuff. They broke her bed.
It's not clear what, if anything, they found. A spokesperson for the Department of Corrections says that inmate with the contraband phone got in touch with her family before prison staff got a chance.
They totally went in damage control instead of trying to figure out how they can correct the system.
Grace leaves behind a 1-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. The 24-year-old was saving money to go to nursing school.
No one deserves to, and especially at work where she was working hard to take care of her kids.
And the Georgia Department of Corrections spokesperson says 6 Aramark employees have been told not to come back to their jobs at the prison based on this investigation, but they did not explain why. The food company says they're working with corrections officials to assess employee safety there. Guys?
Yeah, it is a remaining question. How did that contraband get in the jail in the first place?
Yeah, and the biggest question, of course.
And your heart just goes out to that family.
Yeah.
Rob, thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
The family's attorney, Brent Savage, was even more direct in his criticism. Speaking about the lack of security, Savage stated, "It's awful. They had no guards in the area when she was shot to death. It's horrifying to think what's going on in these prisons." He emphasized that there's no way Orion could have brought the gun in based on the security she had to go through.
News 3 learned that the pair had a personal relationship, but the attorney for Arian Grace's family says investigators should be more concerned with how a gun got behind prison walls.
Firearm in the prison system is beyond me that I can comprehend.
How a firearm got into the hands of inmate Jadrakis Hart is the question on the minds of Arian Grace's family. Their attorney Malone Hart sharing their devastation after the death of the young mother of 2.
There's no way that she could have brought it in based off the security she has to go through. It's the security elsewhere that's lacking, and we believe this firearm was actually brought in prior to her ever working there.
The family claiming they have not been treated with respect by the Department of Corrections.
No way that a family should lose a mama or a child, a daughter, because she's in a bad relationship. The focus should be on the system acknowledging that they should do some stuff take some precautions to stop stuff like this from happening.
Grace began working in the prison kitchen in January. Inmate Hart was serving 20 years for voluntary manslaughter out of Carroll County with a maximum release date of June 2043. A current employee blames Warden Jacob Beasley and Commissioner Tyrone Oliver for not cracking down on contraband. News 3 kept this employee's identity anonymous since she claims to have received several threats.
The inmates are running the prison. We're just allowed to be there. And we're allowed to go home every day by the grace of the inmate.
She has worked in the prison system for almost 15 years, most recently in the mailroom. She says Grace should have never been put in a deadly situation.
There should be an officer running that kitchen and supervising what's going on, and there should be no in the institution. It should be an impossibility.
This incident is still under investigation. Now, this is the second of a staff member here at Smith State Prison in less than a year. You may remember last October, Correctional Officer Robert Clark was killed with a homemade weapon while escorting an inmate.
There's no way she could have brought it in based off the security she has to go through. It's the security elsewhere that's lacking, and we believe it's firearms actually brought in prior to her ever working there. Now let's talk about what investigators found when they started digging into Smith State Prison's contraband problem, because it's not just one gun we're talking about here. In 2023 alone, Smith State Prison conducted multiple shakedowns that seized 1,509 weapons, 694 cell phones, 854 chargers, 7.55 kilograms of marijuana, and 12.53 kilograms of tobacco. These efforts included 18 canine-led dorm searches, 6 full facility shakedowns, and 2 quick strikes since May of 2023. 1,500 weapons in 1 year at one facility, and they still couldn't find the one gun that mattered most. But the contraband problem at Smith State Prison is just a symptom of a much larger crisis plaguing Georgia's entire correction system. Between 2018 and 2024, at least 360 Georgia Department of Corrections guards were arrested for smuggling contraband.
There is an investigation into the death of a Georgia correctional officer. This happened at Smith State Prison, which is in Tattnall County. That's in rural southeast Georgia. Authorities say correctional officer Robert Clark was escorting 2 inmates when one assaulted him from behind with a homemade weapon. The other inmate stepped in to help the officer. That's when he was also hit. The 2 were taken to the hospital where Officer Clark later.
In 2024, federal authorities indicted 23 people in schemes to use drones to deliver illegal drugs and contraband cell phones to Georgia prisons. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated operations involving inmates, their associates on the outside, and in some cases, prison staff themselves. The Georgia Department of Corrections tried to paint a picture of an agency aggressively fighting contraband. They reported seizing cell phones that had doubled from 7,224 in 2019 to 14,497 in 2023. But here's what those numbers actually tell us. The problem isn't getting better, it's getting exponentially worse. And the real issue isn't just the contraband itself, it's the chronic understaffing that makes it impossible to control. Georgia prisons were operating at 50 to 60% guard capacity, meaning there simply weren't enough officers to properly monitor inmates, search facilities, or protect civilian employees like Orion. This staffing crisis has real, deadly consequences. Prison violence in Georgia soared as the state faced this staffing crisis, with homicide rates among inmates exceeding national averages, and civilian workers were caught in the crossfire of a system that was fundamentally broken. Smith State Prison had already experienced tragedy before Orion's death. In October of 2023, less than a year before Orion was killed, Correctional Officer Robert Clark was murdered at Smith State Prison by an inmate using a homemade weapon. And somehow, the Georgia Department of Corrections still hadn't implemented the security measures necessary to prevent these deaths. On July 21, 2025, more than a year after Orion's death, her family filed a lawsuit against the Georgia Department of Corrections in Fulton County State Court. The complaint pulls no punches. It alleges that GDC officials were warned about the gun's presence via inmate tips during official investigations for over a year, but failed to act. According to the lawsuit, these warnings came from inmates and were provided directly to multiple GDC officials, including during official investigations. No lockdown was initiated, no extensive search was conducted, no protective measures were put in place. The lawsuit describes what happened as a massive security breach where officials had multiple opportunities to prevent this tragedy and chose to do nothing instead. It also addresses the favoritism shown to Hart that allowed him unauthorized access to areas where he wasn't supposed to be, including the kitchen where he would ultimately kill Orion. The family is seeking an unspecified amount in damages and requesting a jury trial. As of 2026, the lawsuit remains pending with no reported trial date or resolution. The Georgia Department of Corrections has declined to comment on the pending litigation, maintaining their typical wall of silence when faced with accountability. In the aftermath of Orion's death, Aramark, her employer, cooperated with the investigation and temporarily barred 6 of its employees from returning to work at Smith State Prison. The company never explained why these specific employees were removed, and no criminal charges have been filed against any prison staff members as of early 2026. The Georgia Department of Corrections conducted their investigation, found their internal failures, and then nothing. No meaningful reforms or accountability, just another report filed away while the systemic problems that killed Orion continue unchecked. The broader context makes this even more enraging. In September of 2024, just months after Orion's death, the United States Department of Justice released a scathing report finding that conditions in Georgia prisons violate the Constitution. The investigation found rampant homicides, sexual assaults, gang activity, and contraband, all exacerbated by staffing at approximately half of what was needed. The federal government essentially confirmed what everyone already knew. Georgia's prison system is fundamentally broken, unconstitutionally dangerous, and getting people killed. In August of 2024, Georgia's prisons chief testified before state lawmakers about how drones were smuggling deadly contraband into prisons. He described coordinated operations where external accomplices would use drones to drop packages containing drugs, weapons, and cell phones into prison yards. Now, I want to talk about the children Orion left behind. Her 1-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter are being raised by their grandmother, DeShonda Hagans. Hagans described the devastating impact. Her main priority was her children. Now they're all I have left of her. She worries that her youngest grandchild might not even remember her mother. These children lost their mother because the Georgia Department of Corrections couldn't be bothered to act on repeated warnings about a loaded gun inside one of their facilities. Think about that when these kids grow up and ask what happened to their mom. What answer do you give them that makes any of this okay? Remember how I told you at the beginning that officials knew about this gun? That they had been warned repeatedly? Now you understand the full scope of their negligence. This wasn't an unavoidable tragedy. This was a preventable death that happened because people in positions of authority chose to ignore clear and present danger. Orion Grace wasn't just failed by the system, she was actively endangered by it. And the saddest part? She's not alone. A remarkably similar case occurred in 2022 at Perry County Detention Center in Arkansas, where Roderick Lewis smuggled a gun into the jail and fatally shot 21-year-old detention officer Jeremiah Story during the booking process. Lewis was sentenced to life without parole, but the pattern is the same. Security lapses, inadequate searches, protective civilian workers paying with their lives for systemic failures.
Well, sources are telling me tonight that gun was stashed in this prisoner's buttocks, and he managed to get into this prisoner transport van undetected after he saw a judge. And now 2 police officers are in the hot seat, and another prisoner is in the hospital tonight with that gun wound to the leg. Now, within the last 10 minutes, the suspect, Luis Soto, went before a judge for the second night in a row. Pix 11 cameras were the only ones inside of the courtroom. You see him as he was brought in with his hands behind his back under heavy security. He was remanded into custody, and he is now going to be sent back to the Westchester County Jail tonight, 24 hours after this harrowing incident unfolded. Happened while the prisoners were being brought to the jail inside of a Mount Vernon police transport van 7 o'clock last night. Officials say that the person was shot by a fellow prisoner who'd smuggled the into the vehicle on his body. As cops heard the go off mid-ride, they turned around, raced back here to police headquarters, where 5 prisoners were offloaded and secured. Police say Louis Soto was the man who had the loaded .22 caliber revolver. But how it got past multiple layers of security is what's being investigated right now. Soto's a 32-year-old Bronx man who had been arrested on Wednesday initially for allegedly sexually assaulting a minor. Now he's facing multiple charges related to the. As a result, police are overhauling their security protocols, knowing full well how much more serious this could have been.
He seen the judge reprimanded him to Valhalla. So that means he stood before the judge with the weapon on him. He got in the transport van with the weapon on him. So all them times they never patted him down, that weapon was still on him. That's unresponsible, unacceptable.
The use of the department's magnetometer handheld wand is now mandatory for all new prisoner processings. The use of it was optional previously.
Well, prior to this, the Mount Vernon Police Department was under scrutiny due to a DOJ investigation about unlawful strip searches here at the police department. But now another overhaul is underway as 2 police officers have been put on desk duty while the investigation continues. Live in Mount Vernon, I'm Anthony DiLorenzo, Pix 11 News.
All of this, Anthony, so stunning, especially when you think about how all these places where that gun was along this process. Thank you so much.
What do you think about this case? Do you think Orion's relationship with Hart played a larger role than her family is willing to accept? Let me know what you think in the comments section. Also, click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.